when you're a woman and you play video games, it is a little nerve-wracking almost to play with other people because you know what that situation is like.
If I mess something up in the game and they're like, oh, this is what we get for playing with a girl or something like that. So that's just completely derailed me from multiplayer games.
But as far as playing online with anonymous people, I won't do it anymore. People are just too mean. People get so nasty.
Why, you ask? Well, that's an easy question. I don't want to deal with the people on the internet because I'm a female. I wasn't really exposed to what happens when you're a female gaming until later on in life. But then once I finally started getting into multiplayer games, I realized there is just this discrimination.
And I got really interested in it, and I decided to start playing a little bit. And over time, I started putting a lot of time into it. And I got pretty good. I was playing competitively. I mained Lucio, who's a support character who heals other people. And I was climbing the ranks with Lucio. I was pretty good. People would request to have me on their team until they realized that I was a woman. And I actually quit playing after a few months of competitive because even though I loved the game and it was something that I really enjoyed doing, people were vicious. And 9 times out of 10, it was because I was a woman.
There's a lot of toxicity. There's a lot of sort of sexual harassment and those sorts of things in those spaces. And so for me, I kind of just don't even put myself into those positions. And I stick with other types of games that don't have those aspects.
About 3 years, I've been pretty competitively raiding in World of Warcraft, and
That's not it.
I've been an officer or guild master. So, in gaming as a whole, I would definitely say that it's still not the hospitable environment that it should be. So I'll point specifically to Destiny, since that's the shooter that I have the most experience with. And it is a little unique in that it shares some structural similarities to the MMO. You know, it's a loot treadmill. You do kill bosses, get loot. But at the end of the day, the competitive content comes down to snap reactions, really high skill cap, millisecond responses, and having to do really difficult mechanical things. Shooters definitely attract, I think, people who are going to be a little bit more temperamental. You often get people yelling in shooters. It's much more fast-paced. The reward system in place in shooters is very different. You get flashes around the side of the screen. You get little hit pings when you get a kill. Numbers are constantly flashing. You're getting +1s. There's the sounds and lights. It's almost like a slot machine in Las Vegas. It's the same kind of endorphin triggers. With that comes a much more intense level of investment in the short-term game.
Women tend to be kind of more caretakers and they don't have a lot of leisure time, so they like to play games that are a little bit quicker, like more casual games. But there's also this question of the casual versus the hardcore gamer and who counts as a gamer. And I think a lot of times when you see that discussion just be dominated by men, women play games as much as men do. But the games that women play tend to be categorized as not hardcore. They tend to be categorized as casual games, and thus women tend to be categorized as casual gamers or not gamers at all.
In the core rating team right now, we've got, I would say probably 25% of the raid. So about 5 to 6 people, depending on the night, will be women. It's difficult for women to break into high-level competitive play in a lot of games, and I don't think it has anything to do with any kind of skill gap, but just that most games where it does require this kind of coordination, it's hard for women to find a place where they're going to be able to play and be themselves without kind of having to deal with BS the whole time.
I have one female gaming friend. I have one. Oh my gosh, I just realized that. I have one. That's Kayla. I have one. I have so many male friends. I have at least 10, like close, male gaming friends, like 8 to 10. And I have one female gaming friend.
I was just reading a study the other day about representation in video games, and men tend to be really, really overly represented in video games. Women are rare, particularly in protagonist roles. It's not to say they don't exist, they do, but they're not as common, particularly when you start getting into women of color. When you do see women, they're either white or some kind of non-human race or ethnicity or something like that. So I think part of it is that people do like to play games just like they like to watch movies that feature people that look like them. That's just kind of an evolutionary thing. So women don't see those characters as often.
Part of the reason that I was really attracted to Overwatch as a game is that there was so much female representation in this game. There's tons of representation across the board in Overwatch, but you see so many women in really powerful roles, and you see women who really tend to adhere to femininity, right? So you have people like Mercy, like D.Va, but then you also have characters like Zarya who are much more masculine, who are much less willing to adhere to gender norms, and that's part of the reason that I was really interested in that game, that I wanted to play it at all. But unfortunately, it was the online community that really killed it for me.
So when you see women represented, you kind of have some stereotypes that you will see. One is like hypersexualization, particularly when it's women of color. You see hypersexualization where people are really shown very sexually. But you also kind of have the hyper competence aspect where people kind of go overboard on, they're like, oh, strong woman doesn't need a man, but they kind of go overboard and say this woman is infallible, that she can literally do anything, and that can be damaging as well. So you want to have realistic representation. You want to have flawed characters. You don't want them to be like a Mary Sue that could just do anything. That's boring. But also, again, damaging, particularly in post-game attitudes towards women. You don't want that. So you see like hypersexualization and hypercompetence, also incompetence, like they need a person to save them, a man to save them, like a damsel in distress kind of thing. So you see those kinds of themes. The biggest thing that is important in representation is that the representations are accurate, that they present the group as heterogeneous, that they're not all the same type of person, because ultimately stereotyping is just about painting a group as all the same. So if you're able to paint them as all unique, then you can reduce stereotyping.
I think that there's some dated stigmas associated with femininity in gaming. There's definitely branding things that happen with that. Games are pretty much designed with men in mind, though that has been changing somewhat in recent years. But I definitely still think that that's the environment that's curated for most games.
I mean, I would say that the demand has probably always been there, but developers have not done it. Part of the reason is that developers are afraid of change, I think. Particularly AAA developers who are like the big kind of almost blockbuster type games. They're afraid to do things that are risky because they put a lot of money into the game and they don't want to lose money. I think when you start to see mainstream successes with female characters, with characters of color, then you will start to see a shift because people will see, okay, it's not that risky. So it's not that big of a risk. And you see this a little bit in movies, where we had movies like Get Out and Black Panther that were very, very successful featuring protagonists of color. And now in video games, I mean, the Tomb Raider series is hugely successful. Metroid, which features a female protagonist, is successful. So those sorts of characters have been there. They have always been there, but they're not the mainstream yet. But so it will take some more success with featuring those types of characters before everybody will get on board, I think. I mean, I think the biggest way to vote in favor of that shift is to buy games that feature those characters, because that is what people care about. That's what developers care about. They, critical success is great, but it's pretty meaningless if nobody buys a game. So, there are, like I said, there are shifts, and there are games that are starting to have these types of characters. They continue to be successful, then you will continue to see it. But really the biggest way for people to kind of force that change is for people to buy the games, because ultimately that's what the developers and publishers care about.
Hopefully if we correct the problem in this sphere, the gaming community, it'll branch out into the rest of society. It's all connected, The gaming community isn't just this vacuum that there are people that only game and that's it. The rest of us have lives. We interact with other people. If we can start something here, that will definitely branch out to other fields, other spheres of society. It's up to us.